Today's episode of Dominaria's Judgment is brought to you by StarCityGames.com, where you have until Monday, July the 12th at 10:59 a.m. Eastern Time to enjoy our weekly sale. This time around, it's giving you 15% off all played and heavily played foils. And we have something there for everyone. If you want to splash out on a foil Lorwyn Thoughtseize with that amazing but disturbing art, or a foil Future Sight Horizon canopy, which if you haven't seen those in person before, they are absolutely gorgeous. Or if you want something small for Cube, Commander, or Constructed, we've got you covered there as well. That's 15% off played and heavily played foils all this week over at StarCityGames.com/sale.
This week's Dominaria's Judgment is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel, the #1 store for Magic the Gathering inspired apparel. Take a look at their t-shirts, hoodies, stickers, and just general stylings at coalesceapparel.shop. Then use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10% on your entire order. And seriously, I want to emphasize that sticker part. Shirts are cool, but you can send a targeted message with the sticker. Slap it on your deck box if it matches your commander, or if you really want to get inventive, find a way to slap the 3x4 sticker on your 2.5x3.5 Magic card, maybe with a sleeve, maybe with a hard case. You're inventive people. You'll find a way to make it work. So take a look at coalesceapparel.shop, check out their product lines like Wooburg Forever and Ravnica University, and see what catches your eye. Remember, use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10%. Coalesce Apparel and Design. No one made what they wanted, so they made it themselves. If you are looking to sell your Magic the Gathering cards, it's never been easier than with StarCityGames.com. Make the best of our 30% store credit bonus and the fastest turnaround time in the industry when you use any of our 4 simple ways to sell located at StarCityGames.com/sell. You can check out our buy list, box up your cards, and send them our way with the ship and sell program. Come on into the Star City Game Center in Roanoke, Virginia for that personal touch. Or if you have everything, 500,000 cards, you want to store and you want to do some bulk, we'll come to you. And seriously, when we're talking about these large collections, Star City does mean they will come to you. The list of places goes from Ohio to New Jersey and elsewhere. Like, seriously, I've driven from Ohio to New Jersey. That is not a short drive. So head on over to starcitygames.com/sell, that's SELL, for more details on all these great options. And maybe clear up a little space in your life for your next project, even if that happens to just be even more Magic cards or another Commander deck.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 13, I believe now, of Dominaria's Judgment, a weekly modern podcast brought to you by StarCityGames.com. I'm Dom Harvey, I'm here with Ari Lax, and we are getting ready for our own adventures into the Forgotten Realms, and my worry, Ari, is that's going to be squarely on the Forgotten side here.
I made a list of every card I could potentially talk about. I think I got to 20, but we're digging deep, one of the cards, all I can say about it is it's a 1-mana artifact with flying, and that's technically a thing that could show up in Modern, but I have my doubts about Silver Raven. But there's still a few cards, 5 to 10 maybe, that are worth discussing.
As Patrick likes to remind us on the receivables, discussing the worst card in any given set, the 1-mana cards can only be so bad. And that's a maxim we'll be coming back to time and time again with these reviews, I think. And yeah, I'm writing my piece for Star City this week on just the set's impact on Modern as a whole, or lack thereof, potentially. And you really have to dig deep. So I think there are a handful of cards which I expect to show up, maybe not be revolutionary in their impact, but do some good work somewhere. A handful of potential wild cards which maybe could show up or have some niche application. And then the rest of them are, I guess this is a card you can put in your deck, but I'm not sure why you would want to exactly.
Yeah, the interesting part to me is that I don't even think this set would have had more impact if it had come out, 2 months ago. Which is it's not an issue of there's powerful cards that cost more mana. There's just there's not a lot of stuff going on that is open-ended or synergy based. It's just a lot of rolling a d20.
Yeah, if we go back a few months now, our first episode was going over the expected impact of Strixhaven on Modern, and I think we were both a little higher on that set at the time than most people were, although we kind of misassessed, along with everyone else, exactly where that impact would be, where you were actually the one who highlighted Expressive Iteration to me. That card wasn't on my radar at all, and that maybe is probably the most impactful non-MH2 card of 2021 that is still in the format. So easy to miss, even with the sets which are coming in low, so to speak. But we mentioned at the time with that set that the expected impact of a set and our expectations for that have been so thrown off by the 2019-2020 round of sets, which all came in so high that, yeah, most sets are going to be Strixhavens and not Thrones of Eldraine, I guess would be the plural there. And this set, definitely more of a Strixhaven than a Throne. I don't think that's such a bad thing, but especially in light of Modern Horizons 2, which was this absolute bombshell hitting the format and was designed to be, that would be a failure if it wasn't. Any set was going to look underwhelming in the shadow of that, but this one is also definitely not helping itself by any means.
No, and I want to be the Strixhaven apologist for a minute. I think there's probably so when I went through that exercise of what cards could I possibly play in Strixhaven, I came up there was possibly 100 cards that in theory could see Modern play in some weird scenario. Just because Strixhaven did a lot of really weird things that were not just really tangential to stuff that had already been done, but in a way that made you go what could I do with this? I don't have any of those same feelings about this set at all.
Yeah, we're coming back to Strixhaven now for the exit interviews that we're doing for each format over at Star City Games. And coming back to Strixhaven from a modern perspective, a lot of it is stuff which we were kind of right about, but it just didn't end up mattering all that much. So, for example, Threading Discovery legitimately is a big deal for Dredge. It's just that Dredge, at the time, didn't really make as many waves as we were expecting, and the format adjusted. And then with Modern Horizons 2, there were so many cards in the set which seemed designed just to punish Sodek, basically. Is if you want to play Dredge, then you have to wade through Endurance and Sanctifier on Vec and Dalthy Voidwalker, and that's just the cards which are explicitly aiming to hose you. It's also the rest of the format is getting a shot in the arm at the same time, and so it's just so hard to be a Dredge player in that economy.
Yeah, Modern... So I guess we can get to this up front. I think that the big thing is kind of the way I kind of described what happened with Modern Horizons 1, 2, and everything in the middle is that when they were building Modern Horizons 1, Modern was in the full-on throes of Fatal Push, where if your thing that you were doing costs more than 1 mana, that's just wrong unless it instantly wins the game. It was just a bad idea. And that set was really how do we scale this back? How do we put power into 3 and 4 drops and Force of Negation and things like that to slow it down? And it kind of actually dropped a second that had already started being pushed back against with War of the Spark. Just Narset and Teferi holding back a few things here and there, and Karn. But I don't think that was really gonna live very long with the London Mulligan. And that kind of required a resculpting of the low level of the format. And then we had all of 2019 and 2020. We got to a point where they basically banned all the cards that made the 1 mana driven format a huge deal, with the exception of Monastery Swiftspear, right? Because Fatal Push was getting pushed out of the format because you couldn't really kill someone fast enough before they started playing 3 drops without the full power Death Shadow stuff. And even then, Death Shadow was kind of getting scaled against by Skyclave Apparition level threats. And you kind of were in this Modern where you were no longer a 1-drop format. And then we went over our top 8 list, and we both determined that of the top 10 cards in this set, 9 of those 10 cost 1 mana or 0 in Modern Horizons 2.
Yeah, it's that, and then I guess Motide Regent, which, okay, technically it's a 7-drop when it comes to Prismatic Ending or whatever, but that's actually a good thing, and Fatal Push, Skyclave Apparition, stuff like that, but that's a 2-drop the vast majority of the time. And yeah, it feels like so much of the set is either 1-drops or cards that cost 0, and you're cascading into them for 3 mana, and in theory, that raises the entire curve of your deck because you can't play anything that's cheaper. But there are so many good cards in the set that cost 0, but which technically cost more than 3, that you get to bypass that anyway, and you have a bunch of endurances and subtleties and force negations and so on in your deck anyway. Or it's stuff that you are bringing down the cost on and getting some gigantic discount. So Motide Regent we already mentioned, or stuff like Thought Monitor, which is fine for what it is, but that's very much what it's doing. It's going back to the affinity mechanic, which anyone who was around in 2004 knows just how powerful that can be. And then you have stuff like Asmo and Cookbook, where you're kind of cheating costs indirectly. And yeah, so much of the power of the set is tied up in these cheap cards, which in theory, this can all help to balance each other out. And when you have stuff like Solitude and Grief and Prismatic Ending is a big pickup too, then you have these safety valves that keeps all of that in check. But that is the one thing which, going back to the first Modern Horizons, you look at where it really succeeded and where it failed. The failure was in stuff like Hogak, which is the archetypal free spell just ruining everything. And someone brought back the Eric Lara quotes tweet back into circulation of who knew it was the Del spell that was going to be broken this time. And Motide Regent certainly bringing that back into the conversation again. But Hogak was, again, just an egregious mistake, which you can see why they wanted to put power there, but at the same time, it felt like that was inevitably going to go too far. And then Arkham's Astrolabe was, again, this one drop which removed a lot of the mana and deck building constraints in the format and just added as something that encouraged you to play these other cheap cards. And then where the set succeeded, you look at stuff like Urza, which Patrick in the Receivables episode on Modern Horizons 1 said, this is the big hit of the set and the card that I think the set will be remembered for. And I agree with that. I think that is one of the hits there. And that's a card which forces you to build your deck in a way where you're getting up to 4 mana, which often is easier said than done in Modern. But even there, we're looking at a card where you pay 4 mana and immediately Urza often gets you that much mana back or more. So it's effectively a free spell with the Serra Avenger text on it. And so, yeah, it feels like that's one thing the format really is lacking at the moment. It's things in that kind of mid-range position of 3 drops or 4 drops, which want you to build your deck in a certain way, reward you for doing that and for getting up there, and which don't just collapse into this same principle of everyone's just playing the cheapest cards that they can get their hands on, and that firefight is taking place in the early turns every single time.
Yeah, at the least, these cheap cards are all like combat oriented and require like players to make plays in a like non-arbitrary fashion. It's not like Hogak where like you would make 2 plays, but then you'd really be making like 13 plays in a turn. It's like, no, you're casting a Ragavan and then like next turn maybe playing a spell or 2. It's just that these cards are really, really good.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the stock mana output of a Hogak is or whatever the terminology would be. But either way, I think that's something which maybe it would take a set like MH2 to address that problem, where you would need that incentive like Urza or like Yawgmoth actually might be the perfect example of what we're shooting for there. You can't really print cards at that power level in a standard legal set. And so you almost need to wait for the next supplementary product to usher those cards into the format somehow. I don't know if when we go back to Innistrad yet again later in the year, if we're going to get those kind of purchase incentives we need to rebalance that aspect of the format.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting from a design perspective that like the condition the format was in from like January to whenever, like post Euroban to Modern Horizons 2, like none of that was remotely predictable. Like I don't think anyone playing the format ended up like getting to that point and being like, oh yeah, I could totally predict that we wouldn't care about 1 drops or Fatal Push or whatever. It's like, what? Like we're just all casting Skyclave apparitions and whatever other 3 drops, and this mono white deck has like 23 drops. What's going on? It took a little while to adjust to.
You could argue we came to our senses towards the end collectively and started playing the Swift Spear, Soulscar Mage, 24 1-drops deck, and that swiftly became the best deck in the format. But yeah, there was a period where you could kind of just get away with doing a bunch of stuff, which in most iterations of Modern you can never really justify. And if you look over the broad sweep of the format, the timeline going back a few years, I think those periods only come around every so often. And if you want to harken back to some golden era of Modern, I don't even know when that would be at this point for any given set of criteria. And as with any kind of nostalgic vision, often when you get deep in the weeds on that and you get to a certain level of granularity, then a lot of objections suggest themselves. And it's more complicated than you remember it being. So yeah, I think this is the new reality, and it's fine for what it is, but I would like to see some kind of long-term pushback to that at some point.
Yeah. Oh, and I do have an opinion on when the golden era of Modern was. It was there was exactly a team Grand Prix where Hollow 1 was good, and people had figured out how to split their sweepers against meddling mages. I want to say this was early 20 or mid 2018. Whatever that was like the perfect era of Modern.
And funnily enough, this is exactly that time that you alluded to, right? Where Modern Horizons 1 design was either in full throw or being finalized. And it's weird to imagine the scale of the task facing the developers at that point, where you have a snapshot of the format as it exists right now. And that is determining your expectations for what the format has to look like in a year or 18 months, even though you know that no format, and especially not Modern, is going to be remotely the same in a year or 18 months. So I guess you have the advanced knowledge of what sets are coming down the pipeline, but then you get into the task of predicting what those are going to do to Modern, and that's no easy task itself. So don't envy them by any means. But it's interesting to think that just as maybe we had reached this kind of final form of where Modern was at that point, that just at that very moment, the seeds of its destruction were being sown.
Yeah, I mean, I think people's reactions to this format would be a lot better if Ragavan existed on Magic Online, let alone like didn't cost like, you know, a night out and a movie and a dinner and like whatever else to get one copy of. But you know, I mean, have you seen the monkey index of how many Ragavans are worth one monkey? It's
one real life marmoset. Yeah, it's a fantastic concept, and it illustrates just how drastic things are getting on the Magic Online economy at the moment, where this is actually a real constraint that you have to take into account when looking at these results, where in the first week, you expect there to be some card availability issues, but for those to mostly resolve themselves before too long, and we get a somewhat accurate picture of where the format is at in the following weeks. At this point, the format has circled back around to where it is very difficult to just get your hands on some of these premier MH2 cards, where the rental services either don't have these cards in stock consistently or are not accepting new applicants. And so if you are someone who is diving into Modern, if you're trying to buy into Magic Online here, then either you are ponying up the cash or the tickets directly just to get your 100 ticks apiece Ragavans, or you find a way to coordinate with a friend who's lucky enough to be able to rent them, or you're refreshing the Mana Traders rental page every minute for 30 minutes to try and get them. So that is actually something to keep in mind when looking at these results, where however dominant you may think Ragavan or Urza Saga is or whatever at any given moment, the true dominance of those cards is probably way more exaggerated than that. It's just that there is this artificial constraint in place at the moment.
Yeah, I will say that is League play has been a little. It's a good way to just like try things now, because you're not necessarily like the odds you are playing against the exact like best 3 decks in the format is even lower than usual, and that's kind of nice. It's unfortunate. The thing I would want to play is, you know, various glimpse decks, the Glimpse of Tomorrow, but those aren't functional on Magic Online still. So, or you're playing the one that's basically Tybalt's Trickery, and that's not really what I'm looking for.
Well, yeah, that's another thing we should mention too, is so with these Glimpse of Tomorrow decks, one of the versions of that has picked up some popularity is not the one where you're cheating into play a bunch of Emrakuls and Omnisciences and God knows what else. You're playing more of a small ball game where all of the pieces work together so perfectly to generate a ton of additional resources. So looking at cards like Tireless Provisioner, the Tireless Tracker throwback from MH2, which makes a bunch of treasure tokens or food tokens of your choice. Omnath Locus of Creation is the main offender here. Once again, feels like we're saying that a lot, where let's say you glimpse 10 permanents into play and you have several copies of Omnath and a bunch of lands, where you're getting just a gigantic tower of triggers that Magic Online does not know how to process properly. And on top of that, Omnath doesn't even function as it's intended to, where I think you're getting it's either more life or more mana or both than you're meant to, where each you obviously have the legend rule with Omnath, but then the timing of if this trigger is off for the first time each turn, or the second time, or the third time, there's some flaw in how that's being checked, and so you're just getting life with every single trigger, or you're getting a bunch of mana in spots where you really should not be allowed to have that much mana. So yeah, that deck is just not operational. So you have to go through all of these different steps of, firstly, do I have access to the card for this deck? And secondly, does this deck actually function properly? So one additional coda to that, which mainly comes up in Legacy, but it also, there are some modern applications too, is if you try to undo an action with cards that let you do that, sometimes that just demolishes the game. The game either stops or restarts or just ends abruptly, or basically the entire experience just abruptly ceases to exist. And so you have to be cognizant of that, and sometimes there's just no way around it. So there's the in Standard, for example, you have the Jeskai Mutate deck that came out of the Strixhaven Championship, where that deck, sometimes you're going off and then you're not going off because the game has ended for no apparent reason. And so that affects how that deck is functioning in that format. So there's just a whole lot of weird stuff going on Magic Online right now, which for all of Arena's faults, Magic Online, we should not be romantic about its status at the moment either.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the decks that have actually been winning this weekend? Because we had a pretty important event in terms of modern stuff. It's a showcase challenge. So these are not the like super exclusive ones, but they're the ones that qualify you for the super exclusive ones, correct?
Yeah, and this is the type of event that people do take seriously, where for the challenges on the weekends, you have a bunch of the usual grinders who show up to that, and people do want to win at those, but for the most part, people just play what they want to play, or maybe they're deliberately trying something new to mix it up. For the showcases, people do take them seriously, and in a world where we really don't still have large-scale paper events to use as a bellwether, these are the events which you look at and use to test what people really think about the format right now. And that picture mostly conforms with what we were saying before about the format condensing around all of these very cheap spells. And so first place in that modern showcase, an undefeated run throughout the entire event, I believe, MCE Blazer, who you may know as Milan Bayana, just super smart kid, one of these Zoomers who, if they were allowed to play for these Pro Tour Mythic Championship level events that they were qualified for, would just be demolishing us all. So maybe for the best that they're being, the drawbridge is being pulled up there from a competitive standpoint. But someone who, already a lot of accomplishments to their name and expect that to very much continue in the future. And he won this tournament with a blue-red Murktide Region deck, I think is a fair way to characterize it, where you have a lot of the premier threats from the new set. We've got 4 Dragon Rage Channeler, 4 Ragavan, and then 4 Murktide Region with 2 Dreadhorde Arcanists, rounding out the suite of threats there. And then even more MH2 cards in 4 Unholy Heat, a removal spell that really has picked up in popularity in the past few weeks. 2 copies of Counterspell, and that is the only reactive card really in this deck. Milan explicitly took a much more proactive approach with his list compared to some of the other similar decks in these results where you see, 4 Counterspell and a few copies of Force Negation, for example. Milan taking a much more proactive stance here. And then the cards that you would expect rounding this out, Mishra's Bauble, Expressive Iteration, Lightning Bolt, Thought Scour, Serum Visions. So just bangers across the board. Not a bad card to be seen in this deck. And I expect this to be the template for how people build these decks going ahead. And if you can get your hands on the cards, I think this is going to be, the default litmus test in the format going forward.
Yeah, and again, I think this is another kind of showcase of Expressive Iteration, just being the card advantage that this deck needs to be able to beat removal. Ragavan and Dragon Rage Channeler and even Murktide Regent, they're all just cards that get 1-for-1. Even Dreadhorde Arcanist, there's a window to do that. And if you don't have Expressive Iteration and the low land count, you actually can just get removaled out by something like a Solitude deck. I do love to see Sleight of Hand picking up in Modern again. That's just like a card that whenever someone shows up with that, you can tell that they're like aiming for a very specific, like this 18 land style of deck. That's like a very classic Legacy style of deck. It's always good to see that it means someone knows what they're doing. I guess when you see that with Dreadhorde Arcanist.
Yeah, that one also helps out the sorcery account for Delirium, where most of your other bases you have covered, a lot of instants, you got the Mishra's Baubles, usually you're going to have a land because of your fetch lands and so on, but you're actually a little light on sorceries, especially considering that your iteration costs 2, and sometimes you want to hold that so that you can get the extra land drop or the 1-drop from it. So sleight of hand also doing more subtle work there, just as a 1-mana sorcery that you can cast basically whenever you want to.
Yeah. The something that's kind of worth noting on the sides of this list is that there's been a pickup in the Crashing Footfalls Cascade deck again. It was pretty present like the first week or two of the format, then kind of fell off real hard. And now we've looped back to it being played. Some of that, I think, is just the Magic Online Championship having a bunch of high-profile players playing it. And some of it is also just that people drop the Chalice of the Voice in their sideboard, and those are showing up here, which is kind of funny in this all 1-drop deck, but you're just casting it for 0.
Yeah, they're showing up here and basically everywhere else that can support them. And, no surprise to see Chalice of the Void as a response to not just Footfalls, but also Living End, which that's a deck which we'll cover in a second. One of the big winners from this weekend. And then the wild card in these Glimpse of Tomorrow decks, which maybe they're just the gimmick, which have a lot of Twitter screenshot equity, but maybe they are actually just broken. And if that's the case, then you don't want to be caught off guard by that. You want to have this kind of universal answer in your sideboard. And the fact that this is effectively a 0-drop hate card that's colorless that any deck can play means that even decks which themselves would be highly vulnerable to Chalice on 1, like this deck, get to leverage that. But then also, if you're a deck that can cast Chalice on 1, that's a great spot to be in at the moment, because you get the free wins against the Cascade decks, and then also a bunch of these super low curve aggro decks get locked out by that card too. So I'm not going to say this is the time for Eldrazi Tron, but if you can find a better deck that can support main deck Chalice of the Void, I think that's a great place to be. And we saw Cannister in his latest adventures in Elementals in Modern, playing main deck Chalice of the Void, and I expect to see that becoming more and more common too.
Yeah, I really would not play Eldrazi Tron right now. I cannot imagine paying 5 mana for Reality Smasher against these cards. It's just like
you
look at a Reality
play a 5/5
Smasher.
haste and can't attack into you play a 5/5 haste, cannot attack into their 2-drop 7/7 flying dragon and just have to pass the turn. It doesn't feel like a great place to be.
Yeah, just not remotely. Yeah, play some real cards with your chalices. Moving along to second place, we have the Crashing Footfalls deck. The reason for the Chalice of the Voids. Not too much new here. The one thing I'll point out is that it's the full 4 colors, not like skimping on any colors. Which I think is correct. It's often that this deck wants to cascade into the second copy of Footfalls, so that's pretty important. And yeah, it's a lot of free spells, a lot of cascade spells, and some adventures with Crashing Footfalls.
Yeah, one thing that's noticeably absent here is Bone Crusher Giant, which showed up in a lot of the early lists just as this interactive piece and backup threat that technically avoided the cascade mana value restriction. I think that card just is not especially good at anything at this point, and so I actually like the move to cut that card from the deck, focus on the deck strengths, and in its stead we have Dead Gone, which is crucially a 1-mana removal spell for stuff like Ragavan or Channeler when that counts, but the Gone side as well, very important again, stuff like Murtide Region, which otherwise Stomp is sure not killing that anytime soon, whereas Gone can at least delay that for a turn or buy you some time there. So I like that choice a lot. And then the fourth color, the white here, gives you not just Ardent Plea, so bringing us up to 11 total Cascade spells in this deck, but also Teferi Time Raveler, which is the mirror breaker for these Cascade mirrors. And I think Teferi is excellent in the format right now, a good reason to be in some kind of Azorius base, or, if your deck can support Teferi, I think it's a good time to be playing that card. And so we see 1 copy in the main deck, 2 more on the sideboard, giving Darthkid an edge in the mirror here. Also access to Wear Tear as a sideboard card, where you see Force of Vigor sometimes. We have a Foundation Breaker showing up in some of the Living End decks. But Wear Tear just as this hyper-efficient answer, once again, I think is the best option if your mana base can support it, and not just against a deck like Amulet, for example, where Wear Tear, you have enchantments in the form of Dryad and Urza Saga, and also artifacts in Amulet itself and the construct tokens, but against Hammer, which is maybe the deck picking up most in Steam at this point, being able to kill Sigarda's Aid and Hammer, or Urza Saga and some other piece, having that flexibility there is really nice. So I think the fourth color definitely worth it, and I like a lot of what this list is doing in general too.
Yeah, I really want to emphasize the and part of that. It's easy to forget that Wear Tear has Fuse. You get to choose and as a it's an or card. You can choose Wear or Tear, but you get to choose Wear and Tear, and that's really, really brutal in the Urza Saga format.
Yeah, I would also highlight one copy of Endurance in the main deck and 3 more in the sideboard, where if you get paired against the premier graveyard deck right now in Living End, this list has 4 Endurance and 3 Teferi Time Raveler post sideboard. So very well set up to fight those Cascade Pseudo Mirrors as well.
Yeah, Endurance also just isn't embarrassing to cast, as people have kind of found out in Legacy these days. Dragon's Rage Channeler just gone. See ya. Nice combat step. There's just Reach is an ability that matters a lot these days. And a 3/4 is not a great size, but it's certainly bigger than all the small things.
Yeah, the 4th toughness goes a long way in a lightning bolt format where people are also trying to attack you with 3 power flyers. So just incidentally a perfect stat line for some of these bigger formats. And then in 3rd place, we have the other big Cascade deck in Living End. And this is the deck which is black enough to support 4 main deck Grief with 0 actual black sources outside of, and this one really tickles me pink, 1 copy of Sunken Ruins, because if you need to work 1 black source in there, well, 1 black source doesn't cast your Grief, but if you draw the 1 Sunken Ruins, then technically you can get the double black there. So I love that that's the direction we have to go in. Also, if you need to hardcast Fairy Macabre at some point, then I guess it lets you do that too.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So there are 3 Gemstone Caverns in the Footfalls deck and none in the Living End deck. And I think that's just because every individual blue mana along the way up to your Cascade spell is so crucial in filling your graveyard with cyclers that you can't afford to have a colorless land on the play.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And then also, if you are stretching to that 4th color, you want a land which, when it's online, does tap any one of those colors, even if otherwise it's really not helping you there whatsoever. But yeah, I think Living End makes a lot of sense as a response to specifically these Murktide Regent decks, or the decks popping up to fight the Regent decks, which we'll get onto in a bit, where there are a lot of games these days where just making some 4/4s does not get the job done anymore. So, they play a 6/6 Murktide Regent, you make some 4/4s, well, you can't really attack into the dragon and you can't block it either. So you're just kind of crossing your fingers and hoping some answer materializes. Whereas casting Living End both beats Rhino's heads up in the mirror and also sweeps away a Regent and a Channeler and a Ragavan, brings all your stuff back, and lets you beat the second wave too. So I think just what Living End is trying to do is fundamentally more powerful. And then because the cards that you need to support the Living End also get you towards your cyclers, you're not priced into having to splash that 4th color for those additional Cascade spells. You still can do that if you want to, and that might be the direction I would start with when I start testing this deck. But I like that you get to kind of keep it simple, and all of the elements in this deck work together nicely, where in the Footfalls deck, you play 4 copies of Subtlety, at least this list does, but Subtlety by itself isn't really doing anything beyond what it says on the tin. Whereas in the Living End deck, you get to Subtlety, put this 3/3 flyer in your graveyard for free, bring that back with your Living End, and then sometimes you get to respond to a spell with Violent Outburst for Living End, bringing back the Subtlety to kind of bounce it back again. And likewise with Grief, right? Where you get to deposit this threat to bring back and also get to double down on its enters the battlefield trigger. So I like what this deck is doing in the format right now, and I like this configuration. I think this approach makes a lot of sense to me.
Yep. And worth noting with Subtlety is it's not like a counterspell. You don't need a target. You can just chuck a card, put the Subtlety right in your graveyard just for another 3/3 after your Living End resolves.
yeah, you get to kind of build your own one with nothing just to power up an eventual living end.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about, I guess now we can get down to fourth place, a Prowess deck. So there were 4 Izzet decks in this top 8. 3 were the Murktide Regent Ragavan decks, and there were some slight differences. We mentioned Force Negation. One of the lists has Archmage's Charm, which I think was popular a little earlier and has kind of looped back around to being a little less popular. But Prowess in the world of Murktide Regent. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on whether this has completely been bypassed or whether it's still a relevant deck?
I think this deck is still really, really good. And I don't know quite how to build it necessarily. I know Patrick likes basically a mono red list that splashes just for iteration, which I think that has its merits. That's a more aggressive approach. The stock Prowess list, to the extent that exists at this point, seems to be blue for entity as before, iteration, no Sprite Dragon anymore. Channeler is competing in the same space, but just being a 1-drop that doesn't demand blue mana is a big upgrade there. And then mostly the same cast of characters that propelled this to best deck status before MH2. I think against Murktide Regent specifically, Soulscar Mage goes a long way there, I think, where you often do get to just attack into a region and then they still don't have good blocks, even though they have a 6/6 or a 7/7 to your cast of 1/2s, just because, with Soulscar Mage, Lightning Bolt or Lava Dart plus Mutagenic Growth or something is still going to cleanly answer the region there. So I think I would maybe look at stuff like Vapor Snag, which this list does have in the sideboard, but with region picking up in popularity, maybe it's time to main deck that card again. But I don't think that the other Izzet deck popping up in a similar space makes this deck obsolete by any means.
Yeah. Okay.
Also, I would say as well, we started this podcast, a few months ago now, just talking endlessly about Lava Dart, right? And at that point, I think it made sense to do that. We've now weirdly looped back around to the point where the premier threats in a lot of the red aggro decks are Dragon's Rage Channeler and Ragavan. And in that world, Lava Dart suddenly makes a lot more sense than it did, even just a few weeks ago. Likewise, Ren and 6, which we're starting to see in some of these your mid-range or control decks, which we'll get to rounding out this top 8 here. Just being able to answer a 1 toughness creature at a profit is actually something that makes a lot of sense to do again.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was going to say that there's also value in being better, faster on board to opposing Ragavans. In addition to Lava Dart, you can just play a Soulscar Mage with Mutagenic Growth in your deck, and what's your opponent gonna do? Are they gonna try to bolt their way through and get their Ragavan through? It's kind of dicey. Ragavan's an exploitable card, even if it's really good.
Definitely, and I don't know how Unholy Heat dealing, either 2 or 6 changes a lot of the kind of breakpoint math in these red mirrors, where does Mutagenic Growth actually get your creatures to a relevant toughness now? If you have, let's say, a Soulscar Mage, growth gets out to 5, and you still need to do a little bit more work to get it to 7, but then maybe you can do that often enough that you can't that you can still growth through their removal spell, if you like, the way that you could previously. I don't know, that's something which I think you have to just get in the trenches and figure out in practice.
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit on which threats you are actually trying, whether you care about the 1-for-1 trade in combat or whether you're just worried about that early turn contesting the Ragavan Connect. In which case, yeah, it's your opponent's not going to go turn 1 Ragavan, turn 2 hit Delirium and cast Unholy Heat. That's just not remotely feasible. Well, I guess it is sort of feasible if they also have Channeler and hit the perfect cards off the top. It's a lot. But once you get to the late game, yeah, there is diminishing returns on Mutagenic Growth once Delirium is online.
Yeah, so skipping ahead now to the next non-Izzet deck in this top 8, we have Hamuda in 6th place on Hammer Time, just continually putting up excellent results with this deck, and they are not the only one. This deck has been everywhere recently, winning the regular challenge on the Sunday this past weekend, and this has, in the past week, become a regular fixture of the format once again.
Yeah, I think the question here is to what extent you're playing Esper Sentinel and Giver of Runes, and to what extent you're shaving into your Steel Shaper's gift count. I know the list that won the Sunday event had a bunch of random equipment. Those have never been good for me. But I do wonder if the, Modern Horizons 1-drops are better than just finding more hammers.
Yeah, I think Sentinel, like on paper, is good against these decks that are flush with cheap removal. That being said, I don't know what the value of a random card actually is in your deck that has a bunch of Memnites and Ornithopters, and it's basically a combo deck that's looking to assemble A plus B. And if you already have A, drawing another copy of A doesn't really do it for you, and vice versa. So yeah, I do wonder if that's where you want to be, and I almost wonder if just now that you have more access to Hammer itself via Urza Saga 2, if just something like Core Outfitter might be the place to be as well, where that is, you have your Sagada's Aids and you have your Paladins, but that is the one missing piece that I think you have the least redundancy on.
My experience, at least playing against the deck, is that the cards have mattered more than you would expect for a deck full of like Ornithopters and Memnites. Not enough that I really want for Esper Sentinel, but it's also just possible you're in the the artifact market just for your pure steals and getting Metalcraft. Yeah,
the other question I have, and maybe the answer is, of course not, what is wrong with you, but is it completely ridiculous to want to move away from Lurrus in this deck? Because I've watched a lot of this deck over the past week, and even in the matchups where you would think Lurrus would be coming in to save the day, against these heavy removal decks where this is the 8th card that then becomes the 9th or the 10th card that buys back your combo pieces. Even there, what I often found was you just don't really have the time. Like, you already have so many other uses for your mana, and many of the decks that are trying to overload you with interaction also applying pressure. It's other like Channeler and Ragavan decks, it's Death Shadow, it's these very lean, aggressive decks where you just don't really have the mana all the time to be picking up and then casting and then trying to do something else with Lurrus, in my experience.
Yeah, I had some of the same reactions when I played the deck a few months ago, where like I didn't really get what Lurrus was doing in a lot of matchups. The problem is that in certain matchups, like specifically, I don't know how much these decks exist in the format so much anymore, but against something like a Stoneblade deck where they have some removal, but not a ton, maybe not the best block, I would be really excited to pick up Lurrus. And it's just like the value over replacement is so high because like, what are you giving up Lurrus for? Are you like, I get to put a Batter Skull in my deck? Like, is that even good? Is a Cauldron Complete good?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe Nettlesis actually as a card which like that is actually just a good card to cast, in this deck a lot of the time. But you're right, if that is the one thing which you're giving up Lurrus for, then that really doesn't seem worth it. Beyond that, are there any specific features of these Hammer decks that you think are worth diving into any further at this stage?
Not really. This is one of the decks that has been impacted. Well, aside from just like putting 4 Urza Saga in the deck, like it's basically the same thing it was before. Oh, there's one thing that was actually mentioned to me by someone else looking at these lists. Jacob Nagro, who's been a bit of a modern brewer of the last year, it was like, how are people playing 4 silent clearings, no black cards, and then have prismatic ending in their sideboard? Like, that just doesn't.
So this question was posed to Cedric many times as he was streaming this deck, and his answer, which I have a lot of respect for, is I was too lazy to switch it up. But this may be a classic case of information cascades where someone does well with this exact list because maybe they were too lazy to switch it up, and then someone just copies that list because it did well last weekend and they don't change it and they do well. So then people look at it and think, well, this exact list did well back to back, so I'm going to copy that list. And no one ever actually makes the strict upgrade of, this silent clearing becomes a Horizon Canopy and this one becomes a Sunbaked Canyon, which you should definitely do if you're looking to optimize it. I don't know how often that actually comes up, but it is a funny example of how there is like a clear mistake, so to speak, that no one has the time or the energy to actually fix for themselves.
Yeah, I think that it's just a holdover from the cranial plating days and no one has bothered to change it. I will also say that Sanctifier on Vec, not necessarily just here, but like in a lot of spots, that card has been killer. The Rakdos deck just cannot function with that card on the battlefield. Nice Dragon Rage Channeler, nice Lurrus of the Dream Den, nice entire deck. Just like this, I think that the Rakdos deck literally has to splash white for prismatic ending to really beat that card.
Yeah, and that's what, if you look at the the marks. The second place finisher Patsy Sanchez, that's what he was doing in his Shadow deck, just splashing just for prismatic ending. Not just with Sanctifier in mind, but that certainly is a good reason for that. So I expect to see that come up a lot. And it may seem weird to pick up this deck at a time when there's a lot of cheap removal running around, and these tempo decks historically have been tough matchups on paper, at least, for this kind of strategy. You can actually grind through that surprisingly easily, I found. And even though this deck looks like it's kind of a house of cards where they kill your one thing and now you're left with a bunch of Memnites and Ornithopters, while that can happen, it's a lot rarer than you would expect. And so don't think that just because you have some Lightning Bolts and some Unholy Heats that you, by definition, have a good matchup against Hammer. That's absolutely not how it works.
Yeah, you need like a clock, like broader removal. And I do think another thing is that Hammer kind of fell into a nice little exploit window where people had moved their artifact removal to Shatterstorm to beat the Asmore decks. And you really need instant speed shatter effects that were not what you wanted against Asmore and food tokens to beat this deck if you want to go down the actually destroying artifacts route.
Yeah, that's another thing about this compression of mana curves in the format, where you can show up with a bunch of pinpoint removal for these super low curve aggro decks, and you can pick off their things one at a time, but if you're just trading down on mana constantly, or maybe you're doing that at parity, you haven't really got anywhere. And so the Hammer deck, for example, they play a thing, you kill it. They play a thing, you kill it. All right, well, now they're triggering Urza Saga, making 2 constructs and finding something else, or they're buying back Lurrus and preparing for a second wave. So just the fact that you have survived the early turns doesn't really mean anything in and of itself. And likewise against the Izzet decks, okay, you dealt with the Ragavan, which was going to run away uncontested with the game by itself otherwise, but now they're just casting Expected Iteration and Refueling, or this 7th place list by White Star, 4 Archmage's Charm, 4 Iteration. They can just reload surprisingly easily and overpower you that way. So you have to both have that cheap interaction, you have to show up with that, and that's the test that you have to pass, and then also you have to be doing something strong yourself, or have some additional way to reload so that you can deal with the second wave. You can't just put some removal spells in your deck and call it a day now.
Yeah, it's this deck is a lot better than it used to be, and it was always, I think, maybe just a little broadly underrated. I don't know. It's always been a hard one to pin down. I don't have like a great like broad picture of like what the tipping point for it is. Like with Infect, there was always a tipping point where the metagame became too hostile towards it that you just couldn't play it. I think this deck is in a similar spot, but I don't know what that tipping point is yet.
Yeah, let's talk about this Izzet deck in 7th Dimension, because this is different enough that it's worth touching on. So this is 4 Channeler for Ragavan, of course, but then we have for the other creatures 4 Sprite Dragon and 2 Snapcaster Mage. And so this is playing a much, I won't say much longer game, but certainly a longer game than some of these other Izzet decks. No Regents in sight, no Storming Entity, nothing like that. And then 4 Counterspell, 4 Archmage's Charm. So this deck can actually fight very well on the stack, and Archmage's Charm is, I think, a very well-positioned card at the point where everyone is playing these high-impact 1-drops, and maybe the most high-impact 1-drop is Death Shadow, which I think lines up very well against these Izzet decks by and large, and so having a nice, clean answer to that is a big deal. And then also, you snipe that Amulet of Vigor, you take the Engineered Explosives, which is going to, in theory, be sweeping your board next turn. You take the Sigarda's Aid or the Colossus Hammer, right, which is going to complete the big finish for the Hammer Time deck. I think just every mode of that card is very good right now, and I don't know if this shell is well suited to that card necessarily. Maybe there's some control deck or some like actual reactive deck that supports that card better, but if there is a good Archmage's Charm deck, I think that's a good place to be right now as well.
Yeah, and it's worth noting one other aspect. We again see Lurrus in this deck next to Seal of Removal, and that with Seal of Removal becoming better and better against Murktide Regent, I expect that duo to be picking up in steam going to the next couple weeks. Specifically, it's you're using Seal of Removal not just as a bounce spell for their things, but to protect your Lurrus from removal.
Yeah, and then rounding out this top 8 in 8th, we have Corrado on Bring to Light Scapeshift with the 4 Dryad of the Elysian Grove for Valakut package. And this is a deck which I think makes a lot of sense insofar as you dodge a lot of the removal that people have to play now just to keep up with these low curve aggro decks. And then you also have this this big finish in Scapeshift, which kind of trumps anyone doing a similar thing. And likewise with Bring to Light for Tybalt or Valky, God of Lies as well. But then you also have Prismatic Ending, which is a bigger pickup for this deck than it seemed like it should be, where, okay, yeah, you're just upgrading the bolts or the paths that you used to have into Prismatic Ending. But what I found before when I was trying to build this deck to keep up with Prowess, for example, was you really needed to kill their 1-drop, but if that card was Path to Exile, then you were just getting them to the point where it was much easier to cast Storming Entity or to refuel with Iteration or to present that second wave that would put you back in that same position again. And Ending just cleanly answers the 1-drop, cleanly answers whatever else is going on, while getting you to the point where your Planeswalkers, your mid-range threats are just taking over the game. And there's answers Blood Moon, which has been an issue for the deck in the past. So that card is just an excellent pickup for any white deck in the format that has non-white sources in it. And you can maybe diversify your Canopy lands, for example, in your Hammer deck to support that. But in this specific deck, I think it fills a role which no other card could really fill, but which is enough to be a big pickup here by itself.
Yeah, I will say I like this deck a lot more when the format was more dominated by the blue Asmore decks. You're kind of exploiting the fact that those decks are like, I'm going to kill every creature you ever play, but then also like relying on weird permanents and not having the fastest kill in the world. Whereas I'm a little less excited about it when your opponent's like, turn 1 Ragavan, good luck, I'm going to hit you with some red and blue creatures. It's a little...
Yes. I will say, like I said before, Red and 6 actually does snipe down those 1-drops now. So if you're on the play, that's something that maybe you can capitalize on. But it does feel like this deck kind of jumped forward a week or two, where if we were back in that world of like Asmore and Solitude and Yawgmoth and so on, this is the way that you exploit that. This is the next level deck. And it feels like the rest of the format has gone off in a different direction. And this deck is still hanging in there and still doing something powerful, but it's not the hard exploit that maybe it was even just a week or two ago.
Yeah. Anything else from this top 32 that interests you a ton? It looks like it's a lot of the same kind of things we're seeing. Stuff we've mostly covered before. There is a Waste Knot deck somewhere in these results that is really just a black-red mid-range deck that's playing 4 Burning Inquiry and 4 Waste Knots. So, like, that's the deepest we've gone.
It really is more of the same, which is bad news for the format, perhaps. Good news for us, because we are making a terrible time here in this opening segment. But it feels like there's no Asmore in, I think, certainly the top 32, and I don't think in the challenge results either. It feels like we went from that deck being maybe not the consensus best deck, but consensus one of the best decks, to just vanishing altogether. No Primeval Titans in sight, no Amulet of Vigor in this top 32. So this is a much different snapshot of the format than really any of the challenges from the past month or two.
Yeah, those two decks being absent is very strange to me. Maybe not the Asmore deck so much, because I can see people kind of getting under it and exploiting the fact that Asmore is a key weak point of the deck and making their Murktide 7/7s. But Amulet Titan, I guess a lot of these Izzet decks are just relying on sideboard Blood Moons and being fast.
Yeah, and that's going to be good enough a lot of the time. The Hammer deck can race you fairly reliably, I think. So that matchup maybe not as good as you would want it to be. I don't think the format is moving in a better direction for Amulet Titan anytime soon, but it's always there just lurking, ready to make its reappearance. And you write that deck off at your peril, because there are some decks where your opponent plays, turn 1 Urza Saga, or turn 1, Amulet of Vigor, or Arboreal Grazer, and that is the worst possible opening you could hope to see. So would not write that deck off by any means. Still one of the most powerful things in the abstract going on in the format, but maybe just not that well positioned at this moment.
No. You want to jump over to the Sunday results quickly? maybe skim over some of the stuff we've already covered with the same Izzet decks doing reasonably well. But Hardened Scales was back, second place.
Yeah, you love to see it. I think the main deck, mostly a copy of my list from the challenge, down to the one Stomping Ground, which once again should be a Grove of the Burn Willows if we're going that route. It is weird. I feel like I don't know what the good matchups for Scales are meant to be at this point. And this is a deck that does get punished hard by people picking up stuff like Unholy Heat and Motide Region and so on. That being said, the deck is powerful enough just on paper that you can plow through that a lot of the time. And, if Amulet is disappearing, for example, that's great news for Hardened Scales. Or if people are moving away from stuff like Force of Vigor and Wear Tear and whatever, then that gives you some more breathing room. So I don't know what the deck is trying to do, but maybe it's just better now at doing that thing. And it's in a similar space, I think, to Hammer Time, where I don't have the reps yet to know what the heads-up matchup looks like there, but if Hammer Time is well positioned, I can see theoretically why Hardened Scales would be as well.
Okay. Let's talk about these Elementals decks and what's kind of been going on with them this week, because that's one of the other low-key stories is people just putting all the free spells in the same deck and casting them off Omnath, the Locus of Creation.
Yeah, so I've really enjoyed watching these decks evolve, and specifically on Canis's stream, where it felt like we went through basically every possible permutation of 3 or 4 or 5 colors that supports Risen Reef at some point during the week. And this list here from Moksha in 7th place, this is the 4-5 colors being supported by Cavern of Souls, Reflecting Pool, Unclaimed Territory, and Primal Beyond, which this is the elemental-specific 5-color land from the original Lauren block. And so, as a result, we still get to do these Ephemerate shenanigans, but we're also supporting the Thunderkin Awakener Lightning Skelemental package, which was the backbone of elementals after the first Modern Horizons. But then we also have the full complement of pitch spells here in 4 Fury, 4 Grief, and 4 Solitude in the main deck, being supported by Horde of Notions, which is the Rainbow 5-drop. The full Wooburg here can pitch to any one of those cards, and it's also a great use for your Omnath Burst of Mana, I suppose, and then can buy back any of those elementals if it survives uncontested. Just a very powerful card in the right strategy. Not, any other deck cannot support that card, but I guess this is the one home where that could possibly show up.
Yeah, worth noting, this is also a Kahira companion deck, but the honest way, not the I don't have any creatures with any types way.
And yeah, Kahira actually is a good card in this deck, where paying 3 mana to put that card in your hand is relevant, where you need something to pitch to your Solitude or your sideboard Endurance, but then also just casting this card, all of your elementals get bigger and get Vigilance, where they can now just attack into basically anything and then let you keep the shields up as well. So this is a good Kahira deck and not just a, I guess I'll play the Kahira in my creatureless control deck nonsense.
Yeah, this deck at the least looks amusing. Fury is way better than... It's just great. Fury's great.
Yes.
More people should play it. I don't know if this is the right place to play it, but more people should play that card.
Yeah, I really hope some build of this deck ends up being a staple of Modern, because this is delightful. This is everything I want to be doing in the format. Jumping back quickly to 6th place, we have Kiko. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because they won the very first challenge with Modern Horizons with a Azorius Taxes deck with a lot of Blink stuff going on. So Solitude, Flicker Wisp, Ephemerate, and so on, leaning heavily on Teferi Time Raveler as well. And they are back at it here with that exact same deck. And maybe a few updates. I'm not sure how many cards in the 80 card main deck here have changed during that time, but I can see why this strategy would actually be quite good right now as well.
Why is that? Do you think it's a better time for Skyclave Apparition specifically, or?
I think that against the Cascade decks, you are 4 Meddling Mage, 3 Teferi, 2 Lavinia even, 4 Thalia, and that's just in the main deck. And then against the aggro decks, you still have the Solitude Ephemerate stuff going on, sideboard, Auriok Champion, and you could, I think, make some adjustments to focus on those decks harder now that those are the things that you have to beat at the moment.
That's all fair. yet again, the choice of no Cauldron complete in an 80 card deck makes me. It has to be something that they thought about, which makes me wonder what the reason is, because I would just default to putting a Cauldron complete into an 80 card deck.
Yeah, if there's ever a time for that one sort of Fire and Ice, then this may legitimately be it. But even so, whether it's in the 80 or the additional 15 cards in the sideboard, you'd expect to see that show up somewhere. And I think that this shell, now that you know what you have to target, we can get rid of those Katakis, I think. We can get rid of the Remorseful Clerics in the sideboard. And if if your main deck is very well set up against the Cascade decks and any other combo decks, and then in the sideboard you have additional removal spells and the pro-red creatures, maybe we find a way to work some Sanctifiers in here as well. I think that's a good recipe for success.
I might put some time into that. I am into some random white creature piles from time to time.
Yeah, and I think if you want to put any time into a white creature pile, I guess Elemental technically qualifies as just a 5-color creature pile, but being more faithful to that title, I think this is a good shell there. And then rounding out this top 8, we have, I'm not going to call this a Boomer Abzan deck because it has so many MH2 cards, so that wouldn't be fair, but this is playing just good, fair, honest Magic here, Ari.
Yeah, I would like to shout out that this is not the only deck with a Timeless Dragon in it. There's a Wafo Tapa Esper list that was Wafo. I'm going to just say Esper, but it could have been Azorius, but I just saw a Wafo and a Timeless Dragon.
I mean, that just, how does that not warm your heart? There's, even as everything else is going on, just Wafo showing up with the Eternal Dragon, there we go, analog. Good to see some things that have never changed.
Yeah, they won't. They literally will not change. Yeah, I think we also sort of skipped over humans, but it falls into the same sort of Meddling Mage is good again camp as the blue-white Blink deck.
Yeah, Meddling Mage is good again. I don't know if humans itself is good when there's a bunch of cheap removal, and Fury specifically is just devastating for humans, but this is
gosh.
Going full circle here. When we said during our MH2 previews that is this a time for Sanctum Prelate if everyone's showing up with Prowess, well, maybe not exactly Prowess anymore, but these decks chock full of one-drop non-creature spells, maybe it's time for Sanctum Prelate. Maybe that's a good reason to play humans again. I don't know.
Maybe you'd have to catch people in a week where they really have not adjusted, and I wonder. I guess there's some wiggle room on what. Yeah, the Izzet decks as they exist are not really good against that, and Sanctum Prelate's really good against Living End, at least not so good against Fire Ice and Dead Gone, but really good against Living End.
Yeah, and then the final thing I think to highlight in 11th place, I9K, holding the torch still with black-green Asmore food. And that specifically is notable because it felt like a lot of the Asmore contingent had moved away to the Urza, Emery, Thought Monitor stuff, and I9K just staying true to Gilded Goose and Trailer Crumbs. And we have Finale of Devastation too, which is a change from their previous list, but marrying the maybe the best elements of the old Doomake list with the best elements of the Jerry list from a few weeks ago here.
Yep, and no Feasting Troll King. We're just going to beat our opponent the fair and grindy way.
Mm-hmm. So almost an hour in now. Before we go to a long overdue short break, anything else that we want to touch on?
Not really. I think that we actually have a pretty good spread of top decks in this format. It's just, it feels really weird because so many of them are so dominated by Modern Horizons and Modern Horizons 2 cards.
Yeah, I'm not going to say the sky is falling just yet. I think we have seen a step forward in the evolution of the format, but I want to say cautiously optimistic that there is a next step to go to. There is a level 1 to exploit the level 0, and excited to come back in here for this segment next week to see how that unfolds. But for now, we will go to that short break and be back with you in just a second.
Are you looking to start your ventures into some dungeons, fight some dragons, or maybe just play some more pacifist roles with a deck of Magic cards? StarCityGames.com has you covered with pre-orders of Adventures in the Forgotten Realms singles and sealed product. Visit StarCityGames.com/previews to keep an eye on the latest singles previews to pre-order, or head over to the sealed tab to pick up your boosters, whether that's your basic draft, basic set, or the higher level collector variety. Whatever you want to order, it'll ship right out when the set releases on July 23rd, so you can fill up your spell slots for whatever Magic the Gathering you plan on playing next.
All right, Ari, let's get into what I believe is meant to be like the main billing for this episode, and that's actually the new set, which somehow is already upon us, only a few short weeks after Modern Horizons 2.
Yeah, I think we can continue the we forgot about a joke on this one, but yeah, we're going to talk about Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, the Dungeons and Dragons set, and kind of where it won't and maybe will be seeing it play in Modern, but there's a lot of isolated mechanics in the set that are not gonna bridge well into Modern.
Yeah, I think the euphemism here is, oh, well, at least it really got the flavor right. And I'm not qualified to judge if it actually did that. I'll let the D&D fans chime in on that one. But just staying with the big picture here for the set for the moment, how do you feel about, I guess, firstly, how well the flavor resonated with you with whatever your background is with D&D, and then also stuff like dungeons as a mechanic or the use of ability words as flavor text, which for these modal spells, which has a lot of people riled up for reasons which I can't quite put my finger on.
Yeah, no, I like the ability words. I think they're pretty good at doing what they do. It's like very true. So my experience with Dungeons and Dragons is I've read some of the like manual stuff. I tried to play for 2 hours once and was just off at lifetime. That's not a discussion for this podcast. But the flavor words make a lot of sense with how that game's text is laid out and are pretty important to what's going on here. The problem is it feels like they kind of like exist in lieu of an actual ability that you would build decks around. I like dungeons. I don't know if it's perfectly executed on this time around. And I have concerns about like how it's currently built and expanding it for the future. But like, it's at least an interesting mechanic, just not with a lot of well-costed cards.
Yeah, it has that kind of insularity to it where you have these bread and butter effects that show up in basically every set. You have your shock variant, so maybe that's Unholy Heat for Modern Horizons 2, and for this set, it's going to be a shock that there's some rider on it that lets you venture into the dungeon. But if venturing into the dungeon is not something that is at the power level for Modern, then that card is just disqualified automatically because there are so many better options available to you. And I worry that that's going to be the story across the board for the set, where the stuff that is specific to it from a mechanical point of view just never even gets its foot in the door. And then the cards which maybe find a home from the set, I guess the names will clue you into the fact that they're from the D&D set, but everything else could be from, you know, Strixhaven or Kaldheim or anywhere else, and would make just as much sense.
Yeah, I mean, they specifically didn't push the D20 mechanic for constructed play because that was not, they wanted it not to be part of that. Morrow has said that. The dungeon mechanic, the thing is like, there isn't even a shock that adventures, because I think that, or ventures, not adventures, ventures. I think that they had concerns about the amount of value you would generate if you drew like a couple of those in a game. So they put it on a lot of weird effects. Like the most efficient effect I can remember is like a hammer hand, basically. It puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature, grants some like no blocking, can't be blocked by walls text, and then you venture into the dungeon. Like it's just stapled to a lot of really clunky effects, and you don't really get the payout until you complete that action several times. I think it like the kinds of things that I would be excited to get a modern level payout of a venture are like the 5th time you take a game action. And that's just like, what? Not even remotely.
The way that dungeons are implemented, the scaling there is all messed up from a constructor standpoint, where basically any card that ventures into a dungeon has this additional charm attached to it, where you choose one of you scry one or you gain a life, or I think it's both players lose a life, going from memory here. And so when any card has that text automatically attached to it with the promise of more, it's hard to justify taking a decent effect at a decent price and letting you venture into the dungeon, because there does come a point where you just double down on those effects as much as possible, and then all of your cards have these good additional abilities attached to them. But what that means is you either you go into that as hard as humanly possible, or you don't really touch any of the venture cards because the immediate payoff just isn't there because they have to be very deliberate in making sure that can't be the case. And so you're not going to see any deck, I think, that wants to venture into the dungeon exactly once, because I guess from a flavor standpoint, that's kind of a failure. And then mechanically, with the way it's set up, it has to be an all or nothing kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that they took some big lessons from Energy and applied them to this. But the end result is just like, I mean, do we even see Energy in Modern? Like, I don't think you could make this kind of insular mechanic at the power level that it would exist in Modern without printing like a single card that did the thing in some like modern narrow way, like, you know, some metal crafty style thing, which would just be weird.
Yeah, maybe there's a read across there from the learn mechanic in Strixhaven, where you need to make sure that every lesson has that extra 1 mana tagged onto it, or there's no learn card that's super, super pushed, because then that just becomes a thing that you do all the time, and there's no variety there. And that variety is what you're hoping to tap into. And so as a result, you just don't see, outside of that one hero putting Field Trip in their Amulet deck back in the day, you just don't see any of the learn cards showing up in Constructed past a certain point, because again, it's the kind of mechanic which you can't balance in such a way that you can kind of do it as a half measure. You can kind of dip your toe in the water there, and so it just never really gets off the ground for the most part. Whereas with Energy, of course, had its own issues, but you could at least have a small Energy package where you have some Ether Hubs, and those are decent mana fixing in their own right, and then, Harness Lightning is a decent removal spell that can aspire to be a great removal spell, and so maybe you lean into that a little bit, but not too much, and that at least gives you a little more flexibility, whereas this recent round of similar mechanics just don't have any of that to them, it seems.
I like Learn Lesson a little more than that, but you're not far off. I mean, there is one venture card that will probably see Modern play, but we'll talk about that. And it doesn't, calling it a venture card is really just not even valid almost.
Well, let's get that one off the slate right now then. What did you have in mind?
So this is, oh gosh, I'm going to have to pronounce D&D names. Sararack? I don't know the full title to this card off the top of my head. Let me pull it up real fast. It is a Sararack the Arc Glitch. So this is like a famous D&D character that's like one of the like key villain kind of characters. Anyways, mythic rare, so obviously they're like, this is the flashy like headline legend. It's a 2-black 5/5 legendary creature zombie wizard. When it enters the battlefield, if you haven't completed specifically Tomb of Annihilation, return this to your hand and venture into the dungeon. It has other text. No one cares. All that matters for Modern is that if you control Rooftop Storm and can cast this card for 0 mana over and over and over, what happens each time is you choose any dungeon that isn't Tomb of Annihilation, and you just venture through that. And every time, like, you just cast this for 0 because it's a zombie. Rooftop Storm is, I should probably explain this one too. 5 and a blue enchantment. You can play zombie spells by paying 0 instead of their mana cost. So you can just pay this for 0. Every time you cast it, you venture into a dungeon that isn't Tomb of Annihilation. You get all the dungeon benefits over and over because it keeps bouncing itself to your hand, and you win the game. One of the dungeon benefits is drain your opponent for 1. So like it drains for the number of cards in your library because you're like forced to draw +1. But like you also make treasures and tokens. Like you're gonna win the game. It doesn't, like, you don't really need to worry about translating anything going on into win the game. Like you just will. So there is just like, if you cast this 6 mana spell and have this other card in your hand, sort of like Hive Mind Pact almost style combo.
Yeah, I think the more likely application for this is with Allurin in Legacy, where you get to do a similar thing, and now that's an actual 2-card kill. You don't have to waste a dozen slots on like setting up some 3-point turn where your Cavern Harpy bounces your Parasitic Strix or whatever. You just get to play this a million times and venture through all the dungeons to the point where, you're just looping this over and over. So Maybe for the Legacy Aloran fans out there, I know there's still some people flying that flag, but for Modern, I'm not really seeing it.
I think it is in range. I don't know if it's better than the like Adnos Thassa's Oracle stuff, but Profane Tutor puts a lot more things on the map than I think were possible a couple months ago. So I would keep an eye on it, but I'm not super optimistic. But it's one of the more powerful things to come out of this set.
I guess between like Lotus Bloom, Painted Prism, and maybe there's other stuff I'm forgetting, you can actually work your way towards that now, but then you get to the question of, is this actually better than stuff like, Hive Mind with Pact? Or there are various other 2-card combos where once you allow yourself to aim to get 5 mana, 6 mana, those are also clean kills. So I don't know how this stacks up against those, especially because it is somewhat vulnerable to removal, right? They can just respond to the Venture trigger when it comes into play.
Yeah, that's true. It's in the ad nauseum ballpark is all I know.
Okay. Let's talk about a card which I think actually is more likely to show up here. And this is Portable Hull, which was the very first card, I believe, that we knew about from this set. And I wrote about this card and its applications in Modern for Star City Games back in, I want to say it was May the 10th or thereabouts. And so at that point, all we knew from MH2 was Urza Saga. And so, was sad to hear that I couldn't fetch this card with Urza Saga, but was wondering what else I would be able to fetch in just a few short weeks. Now that we've seen all of MH2 and all of Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, this card has a lot more juicy targets now. And to remind people, this is white for an artifact where when it enters the battlefield, you exile a permanent with mana value 2 or less for as long as you control the Portable Hull. There are so many more good targets now between stuff like Asmore and his cookbook, Ragavan and Channeler, and so much more else besides. But then also Prismatic Ending, I think, has stolen so much of this card's thunder that I don't know how much play it's really going to see.
Yeah, you need like a very specific set of circumstances for this to be better than Prismatic Ending. You need to either really, really care about 2 drops and not at all about 3 drops, or you need to care about the artifact status of this card, which that's like a very reasonable thing, right? Like if somehow an actual Trinket Mage finds its way into your deck, you can like Trinket Mage for a Portable Hull. But yeah, a lot of the wind was taken out of this card's sails in the intermediate month of Modern Horizons 2 reveals.
I wasn't thinking Trinket Mage so much as World of Invention. And so one of the decks that I am actually excited to try now with Adventures in the Forgotten Realms that this set has brought into being is a kind of a Azorius Wurza kind of deck again, where you have Urza Saga now, which balancing the mana requirements there with Wurza is going to be difficult, but we're going to make it work. Don't worry. We'll sort out the details later. And World of Invention historically has been a fantastic toolbox card, but its 2 clear weaknesses have been you can't fetch removal really, and you can't fetch a good finisher unless you're willing to pay like a mere Superion that you can't even cast just so that you can, work for 2 and get to business. And now both of those problems have kind of resolved themselves, where the finisher problem, you have the Black Staff of Waterdeep. So this is the 1 mana legendary artifact that's a repeatable in-soul artifact. And then Portable Hull is the big pickup here in fixing that removal issue, where now you can work for 1, which effectively often means using 3 mana and then just tapping some other artifact you have laying around to find a Portable Hull. And that actually now turns this somewhat clunky toolbox card. It gives you this buyout clause where you can just use it as a expensive removal spell if you need to. And then Portable Hull has the usual applications with stuff like Emery. It both discounts Emery and is a good target to bring back with it. You can tap it for Urza once you get to that stage of the game. So I think you can now decide to care about artifacts in large part because of this card. And so I'm excited to explore some of that space again.
Okay, yeah, I'm in for all of that. Blackstaff of Waterdeep is one of the other cards I have as kind of a, I don't want to say slam dunk, but like it's going to show up. It's just the cost of including this card in your deck is so low that like it's just really good. Like just repeatedly turning stuff into 4/4s is good. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I think also we're coming back to the point where Thought Sword just as a fair plan, even without the infinite combo with Urza, is just good again in Modern, where you assemble that combo, you brickroll any of the aggressive, Channeler, Motide Regent decks, anything like that. You're still good against what few reactive decks are showing up in the format, and then just making a bunch of random flyers is actually a good way to just stall out a lot of the hammer decks or Motide Regent. You can just kind of fog that card indefinitely. And then even against Living End, for example, they bring back 5 or 6 creatures, and if you have the Opera Sword, then you can just keep up with that at parity turn after turn while digging towards the Urza or the other thing that actually puts the game out of reach. So just having that as your main plan, with the flexibility the work gives you in terms of fetching these hate pieces, stuff like Ensnaring Bridge or Tormod's Crypt, Grafdigger's Cage, you can actually just put a copy of Chalice of the Void in your deck and just work with that on 0 now against the Cascade decks, and that's actually a worthwhile thing to be doing now.
A worthwhile thing?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, good. That's all exciting stuff. Okay, you have sold me on Portable Hole as an exciting card. I also want to talk about, I think the biggest slam dunk from this set that's just going to show up are some of the creature lands. Being untapped at any stage of the game for your creature lands is really good, even if these are a little more expensive than we're used to. The ones I have my eye on for Modern very specifically are the black one and the blue one. I'm not a big fan of the rate on the white and green ones. I don't expect those to see a lot of Modern play and possibly just less standard play than they should. The red one is whatever, it does the thing, it's the most efficient for standard, but I don't think it's quite, the red decks in Modern don't even play lands basically, so why would they put this in their deck? But Hall of the Storm Giants, that's the blue one, becoming a 7/7 is really big. I'm aware that Celestial Colonnade exists, and it's if you can play that card, you should play it. But if you're a blue control deck that doesn't have access to white mana, Hall is probably going to 2-shot people. I'm pretty excited about pairing it with Lightning Bolt to actually really make a 7/7 2-shot someone.
Okay. You have my interest.
Yeah, I don't think it's great, but it's the kind of thing that's really low cost to include for that leverage of an end game. And then Hive of the Eye Tyrant, again, it's the kind of thing where I'm aware that Dauthi Voidwalker is in the format, but whenever you're this is a land that's a creature, but also graveyard hate, and it's also untapped on turn 1 for your Thoughtseize, that's just a lot of things going right for a card.
See, I was going to come in here and say the only ones that I care about are the green one and the red one, because looking at the vast array of completely nonsensical lands that have appeared in the M. Hayashi decks over the years, I think this is better than all of them, right? Because first of all, it's a red source, and it has a more consistent application than any of the others. So if you are exactly M. Hayashi or one of their disciples, then I think this is a good upgrade for that deck. And this is maybe not the last we've heard of M. Hayashi in this episode, just as a little tease for those people out there. And then the green one, I think, serves a very specific role in the various Primeval Titan decks in the format, where in Amulet Titan, for example, there is some utility to having a fetchable creature land that you can fire up immediately on the following turn and get busy with, especially when you get to the point where you have a ton of bounce lands in play and you can reliably activate that thing for 6 or 7 or even more. And the fact that, you could always do that to some extent with stuff like Raging Ravine, Treetop Village, or whatever, but the fact that this is a untapped green source on the first turn, which is a major choke point for that deck, and helps you cast your Scout or your Grazer, whichever side of that debate you come down on. It casts your Abundant Harvest if you're into that card. Just being a conditionally untapped green source is a big deal for that deck, or the Elvish Reclaimer decks, right? This casts a turn 1 Reclaimer, and then also, if you're not really doing anything else, you can just fetch this in the late game and immediately start attacking. Some of that application is covered by Urza Saga, but the fact that you have to untap with that card, activate it to get a construct, and then the following turn is the first time you can start attacking, that limits how aggressive you can be. Whereas this thing, there's always this looming threat of, well, this is just going to body me for a large amount of damage the turn it comes into play.
Okay, you've sold me on Nest of the Hydra, but I will make the point on Den of the Bugbear that I think a lot of those nonsensical lands, Radiant Fountain is specifically to be getting in value before your Blood Moons hit, and also stave off Scourge of the Skyclaves, and Blast Zone was very specifically for Auriok Champion. So they played like really targeted roles. Whereas I think that like Den of the Bugbear is almost a liability in a deck that's actually trying to get to the point where it casts Fury. So I'm a little skeptical there.
Yeah, maybe M. Hayashi is just on another level from all of us, and more on that later, perhaps. Let's go into a card which is certainly eye-catching and confusing, but seems to have a lot of potential, and that is the Demilick, I want to call it. So I know this was the focus of your most recent column for SEG. What do you think is the prospect for this card in Modern?
So I think that the prospect for this in Modern, there's the first thing you have to realize. So I guess to read it off, it's blue, 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 which I didn't write about this, but that's actually a throwback to the original Magic Lich. Like that card costs black, 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 black. This is the Demi Lich, so it's blue, 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 blue. Anyways, 4/3, costs blue less for each instant or sorcery you've cast this turn, which is kind of exciting. But then you realize most instants and sorceries actually cost you mana. So the big thing with this card is you're going to be trying to pair it with Manamorphose in Modern almost 100% of the time, because that's the way that you're going to turbo it out. And the payoff for that is that whenever it attacks, you can exile an instant or sorcery from your graveyard, copy it, and then you get to cast the copy, but you have to pay the mana cost on casting it. So it's not quite Dreadhorde Arcanist. And then you can cast Demi-Lich from your graveyard by exiling 4 instants and or sorceries in addition to paying its cost, which is kind of just a nice endgame upside. Though you may want to pair this a little bit with Thought Scour. I know in Historic, I talked about how good this card is with Faithless Looting. So I think the big picture with this card is that, like I said, you want to be pairing it with Manamorphose, and from there you want to figure out what your blue-red deck is doing that's not like it's a bit bigger than Murktide Region. I think the stuff that I kind of thought about with this is the Time Warp shells, specifically just because like it's not even a taking turns deck. It's just that Time Warp plus Wrenn and 6 is a legit endgame. Not that you sort of don't need help to win a game after you Wrenn and 6 Ultimate, but like the pairing of like once you Wrenn and 6 Ultimate, Time Warp is an assured kill, and it also pushes you closer to that Ultimate, has been really good for me. It was better than like the entire rest of the Velomachus deck. Like that entire deck was bad except for those 2 cards.
Yeah, I could see that, and I certainly want to add the Wrenn and 6 Time Warp kind of deck to the queue to explore when I have the time. The first place that my mind went with the Demilick was I remember Ryan Overturf winning a team open in the Modern seat with an Izzet Phoenix deck splashing green for Traverse Uvenwald, and that card specifically seemed very good with the Demilick, where just the base case of this is a 1-mana instant or sorcery makes it that much easier to cast. But then if you are successfully chaining together a bunch of spells in the same turn, this finds you the Demilick that you can then cast and then chain into something else. And so that then took me to Finale of Promise, which is a great way to rack up the triggers to get the discount on the Demilick, while also, you know, if one of the spells is Traverse and you're finding the Demilick on the back end of that, or just doing a bunch of other stuff in the meantime. I tried sketching a few of those lists, and I wasn't fully convinced by either of them until I realized that we already have a deck that is leaning hard on cheap spells and Finale of Promise that we spoke about last week. And this is the Pyromancer Ascension Aria Flame deck from Alexander Gordon Brown from the Insight Esports event that we highlighted as having a lot of potential. It feels like this card could be a good kind of a pivot or backup threat in the mold of something like Thing of the Ice for that deck, where you are casting a bunch of spells in the same turn. You have a lot of good ways to both dig for and recur Manamorphose with Noxious Revival as your free spell. And then you have Finale of Promise, where, you know, you can quite reliably draw a bunch of cards and kill some things, and then just start playing these free Demilicks. And they're not legendary, so if you find several copies in this, you're casting your upgraded hollow ones, basically, just flooding the battlefield with those. And so in a deck which can often spend its time just spinning its tires, drawing a bunch of cards, filtering cards to different zones, being able to get a good free body on the back end there is pretty nice, I think.
That does sound pretty exciting. The card that I had failed to mention my first time through that I want to bring up is Abundant Harvest. Just a really good card. in concert with Demilich. And like, one of the other things that's worth pointing out is that while in Modern, it's pretty easy to build a deck that just has all blue lands. This kind of lets you, like, the cost reduction for blue lets you launder mana a little bit. So like you can cast a lightning bolt off a mountain and that reduces your Demilich's cost by a blue. Probably not super relevant for this format, more so in other formats, but you can stretch your mana a little further than the quad blue implies, I think.
Yeah, the one thing I would say in closing about this card is it is superficially similar to a bunch of the other creatures that care about instants or sorceries, and there are already so many of those in the format that you can't possibly include that many of them in the same deck. But also, they place quite different requirements on you. So if you think about, for example, the Izzet Prowess decks, which are still doing well, the new breed of Izzet decks built around Murktide region, and then if you think back to the days of Izzet Phoenix, those are 3 decks operating in a roughly similar space that, in theory, they all care about playing a bunch of cheap spells, but then their threat bases are very different, and their play patterns are quite different, and what they care about is quite different. And so just taking one of those existing shells and trying to shoehorn this card in there is unlikely to work. And if you do that and it doesn't work, don't then conclude that, oh, well, then this card is a trap and there's no hope for it, because I think you have to build a shell from the ground up with this card in mind. And once you do, I think it does have some potential. I don't know if it has, it is limited by the popularity of stuff like Lightning Bolt and Fatal Push and so on. But if you want to go deep on this card, I think you have to do that intentionally and explicitly. I don't think you can just kind of put this in a deck that already has other priorities in mind.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It's got a lot of little intricacies that I think we're just going to have to play with it a bit to figure out. And where it exactly belongs is, I assume it has a home. It's a really powerful card with a lot of good lines of text. But I expect the first couple of weeks of it to be a little rough.
Yeah, do note as well that you actually have to pay mana to cast the card that you're buying back with that attack trigger. So there's no vision of getting back any of these free spells, the Ancestral Visions or Crashing Footfalls or whatever else. Or if you're aiming even higher than that, you want to use this to recast Into the Infinite or something. All of that is off the table. You're having to play fair-ish Magic with this card, but I think that's still good enough.
Yeah. That about wraps it for me for cards that I am like absolutely sure we'll see play in the format. Are there any that I didn't cover or that we didn't cover that you want to put into this category? Or are we running dry on the definite playables and going to take a look at some of the questionables?
I wish I could say that there was something else here. Let's get into those questionable playables. What have you got for me?
Let's take a quick break first. Let us think about which ones we even want to start with, and then we can get back to that.
What's up, everybody? Cedric Phillips here, stopping by real quick to let you know about one of Star City Games' newest podcast, The Receivables, hosted by yours truly, alongside my partner in crime, of course, Patrick Sullivan, where the two of us discuss Magic sets, both past and present, from top to bottom. On every episode of The Receivables, you're going to hear us talk about the facts of a set, the mechanics of a set, the cycles of a set, the boring stuff, before we get into some crazy stories of when we were playing Magic during the times that the set was legal. We've got a ridiculous award show where we give out awards like the Char Rumbler Award for weirdest card in a set, the Oko Thief of Crowns Award for best card in the set, and a whole bunch more. Before we finally decide, hey, what card won the set and what letter grade should we give the set? It's a whole lot of fun. We're having a blast recording them. Hopefully you have the opportunity to listen to it and you enjoy it as much as we're enjoying recording them. Where can you find it? StarCityGames.com or wherever else you listen to your podcast. The Receivables every single week here at SCG.
Okay, so we are back to talk about some of the potential wildcards from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, and I think one that I'll throw into the ring to kick off this discussion is Oswald. I don't think we have a full English translation of this card yet, but this is a 1 and a white 2/2, which has white tap and sacrifice an artifact, and you basically get to Birthing Pod or Neoform for an artifact with the next highest mana value, basically. So you turn a 0-drop into a 1-drop, 1-drop into a 2-drop, and so on and so forth. So I've mentioned some of the obvious analogs there, and there was actually in the 5.0s this week, which would have been a good Nonsense of the Week candidate, perhaps, a Neoform affinity deck where we're using Neoform to turn our Thought Monitors and our new Mirror Enforcers into Craterhoof Behemoth and Grizzlebrand and so on. This restricts you to artifacts, and I guess that opens up some new space as well compared to Neoform or Birthing Pod. There is some overlap, so if you're using that template, we could be getting Sundering Titan or Sphinx of the Steel Wind or something like that instead. But one application that comes to mind for me is it is quite trivial to find good artifact hate pieces with this card. So turning a 0 into a Graphics Cage or a Soul Guide Lantern, for example, a Pithing Needle, a Spells Guide, and Aethersworn Canonist against the Cascade decks, and going further and further up the chain. That seems like the most obvious application, but you can also aim higher with this card if you want to.
Yeah, I think one of the notable things is that it's a white mana to activate as opposed to Birthing Pod's colorless, which is going to be one of the tricky parts. I do like that you can still use Corridor Monitor to jump from 1 to 3, and you can get stuff like Trinisphere at 3 or similar, like Ensnaring Bridge. So that's going to be a pretty important application of this card.
Yeah, now that we have a Portable Hull as well, that is another good thing to turn your random artifact lands or Mishra's Baubles into as well. It is tough to go up the chain because, as you said, you are gated by access to white mana, and then also you can kick it off with Corridor Monitor, but then you need good artifact analogs to that to keep the chain going. So I think that aspect may be a non-starter. Looking at other artifacts that offer discounts or other artifacts that have affinity, there is Frogmite, which I think is not a great card in its own right. I don't think that just aiming to attack with that card is a good plan, but if you're playing that for free and then turning it into a 5-drop, I'm not quite sure what that 5-drop would be exactly for an artifact, but there's some room to explore there. And then you have the all of the good 7s, which you can turn into surely some good 8 somewhere there.
Well, the Possessed Portal is a wonderful aid if you're in that business. but hear me out. Okay, so we've got Corridor Monitor at 2. At 3, we have 1,000-year Elixir. It costs another mana, but whatever.
Of course. How could I forget?
At 4, we have notable Alara Reborn card, Unbend. Oh gosh, I lost the name of it. Unbender Time.
Oh, okay.
It has untap another target permanent for 2 white/blue. So we've got the 5. I haven't quite figured out where we're going from 5. I guess you could Paradox Engine and untap this and everything else. I think that the buck might stop at 6. So in theory, you could go 1 to 6, and then you could have like a Wormcoil Engine. But this is a lot of bad cards.
This is a lot of bad cards, and the justification that we made with the old Birthing Pod decks was always, okay, well, I don't want to have a Deceiver Exarch or whatever in my deck, but that card can at least do some things. You can find a use for that card in a lot of games of Magic. I don't know if we're finding many good uses for Unbending Time in the average game, but maybe people will surprise me.
Yeah, back to that whole Patrick Sullivan thing. There's only so bad something with power and toughness can be, but there's a lot of ground below that for things without power and toughness.
Yeah, a lot of worst card in the set candidates springing into these chains here. But I wonder if another application might just be if there's some cheaper 2-card combos involving artifacts. So Thopter Sword is one that we've mentioned before and which comes to mind here. I don't know if Oswald is going to be better than something like Goblin Engineer or Emery for that purpose, but it is at least in one of the colors or one of the potential colors for Thopter Foundry, so you can keep the mana base on the rails there. I don't know if there are any others that are worth thinking about. I think that's the main one, but this is the card which kind of gets the cogs going in a way that nothing else in the set really does for me.
Yeah, it's surely a thinker. I'm currently like lost in this 6-drop world where I'm getting Shroom and getting back the Unbender Time, and then like Shroom getting another Shroom. You know what? No, we're done. I'm cutting myself off. Someone else will figure this out. It's too much. Too much. Can't do this lot.
Maybe this goes with that liquid metal coating or torque Sahili deck from last week, where we're now like splicing this in, and we have a bunch of other plan C combos that we can work in. Someone needs to just cut off my access to this stuff before we go any further. But anyway, moving on from this card, what else is there really? We had the show notes set up for this episode, and we went through all of the ones that I know the text of. So you're going to have to guide me through some of the rest.
Okay, Circle of Dreams Druid is one of the kind of slam dunks of like the fringe players. I think it's just as much I'm like it's a slam dunk of the fringe. This is the triple green elf that taps for mana equal to the number of creatures you control. I would like to play more than 4 Elvish Arc Druid. That's just really what I want. And I think it's possible that there's a non-Elvish Arc Druid deck that wants this card. Possible, not likely. Sadly, this is a 2/1, which is kind of like the wrong size for a creature that you want to untap with. But like the text box is powerful. Not a lot to say about it besides that. Just make a bunch of mana, do a bunch of things that are probably just like casting Azuri, but it'll probably show up as a 1 or 2 of. I'm less sure on the Goblin Lord equivalent. It's 1 red. Your goblins get +1/+1. You can pay red and tap it and deal damage equal to the number of goblins that enter the battlefield under your control this turn to any target. Though that is another card that like is the end game activated ability kill for your conspicuous Snoop combo. I doubt it's better than Sling Gang Lieutenant in that role, but maybe there's a reason to not have Sling Gang in your deck or to split your. See, the problem is that you wouldn't want to split your activated abilities anyways, because they're just going to pit the needle Kiki Jiki. It's not like you're going to be like, oh, I can't activate Sling Gang Lieutenant unless your opponent's Angel of Jubilationing.
Can't they just needle the Snoop and shut off everything?
Yeah. Sorry, not Kiki. Yes, the Snoop. Like, it's just, it's not. Yeah, I can't think of a real reason to play Hobgoblin Bandit Lord, but like, it's there.
I think that 3-mana druid that you mentioned, I think that is going to be worse than Llanowar Tribe 95% of the time, and that's a card which I've only seen in one iteration of like the Green Devotion deck, which was maybe not even playable, but it was at least around in like one modern format many moons ago and hasn't shown up since. So I don't have high hopes for that one myself.
Okay. Let's talk about a card that we probably need to burst some people's bubbles on, and this is Tasha's Hideous Laughter. This is the 1 blue sorcery, mill until you hit 20 mana value. I guess it is exile, so that's kind of cool. But what do you think the deck that would be the most cards you could mill for hitting 20 mana value is? Like, what is your guess? Like Amulet or Prowess?
I think the candidate has to be any Lurrus deck in the dark, right? Where their curve is artificially kept low. But I think Mill already struggles with most of those matchups, and I don't know if this effect is actually a game changer there. Just to answer the hypothetical, Amulet is a good answer, especially the stock list where they have 4 Titans and then a bunch of 3s, and then everything else is 1 or a land or an actual 0 in the case of Summoner's Pact. So I mean, your Mill deck does not need the help against Amulet Titan. That one already is free. So looking elsewhere, I think this card it's somewhat promising for Legacy, perhaps, where like this is a 1-hit KO against Storm or lands or a bunch of like very specific decks. But that highlights the use case of this card. It's much more of a Telemann performance, I think, than a just generic Mill card, where you have access to this somehow just to cheese people, but this isn't a card that you put in your deck with any kind of good intentions.
Well, you see, even against Amulet, it's not much more than like a mill. It's not even like a mill 20, I think, against them. I think they have over 60 total converted mana costs in their deck, or mana value in their deck. And I like went through and did the math on this card when it was first previewed just to see how like this sounds crazy. And in reality, it's like this card is not really much more exciting in the best case scenario than Fractured Sanity is. It's a lot worse than you think it is.
There is a weird dynamic here where because this card exiles, it is good against the reshufflers, the Eldrazi that people put in their deck to try and combat mill. But at the same time, because those Eldrazi all cost so much, especially Emrakul as a 15 drop, as soon as you hit one of those with this card, that's it, basically. You get whatever you had before that and the Eldrazi, and then you're done. And so I don't know if this card actually fixes that problem if people decide to care about mill again.
It might, because it actually, no, they can just not. You can mill until you hit 20 that isn't the Eldrazi. Though it does answer the question of whether Gaia's Blessing or an Eldrazi is the better version of that effect.
Yeah, maybe you lead off with this, you hit the Eldrazi, and maybe a few other cards, get thrown into that bargain, and now the coast is clear to start, using your other effects. But yeah, I am not optimistic about this card. And if you look at how mill decks are currently configured in Modern, you main deck all of the mill effects that you want, and then your sideboard is specific cheap interaction for certain matchups for the most part. It's stuff like more fatal pushes, or it's ether gusts, or it's I guess subtlety now as well. It's stuff like that. You very rarely see them have more mill in their sideboard to kind of mix and match their mill effects for the matchup. And maybe that's something people should do more. I don't know. But for the most part, it seems like that core concept of the deck is locked in. You have the crabs and the glimpses and maybe the fractured sanities and the mesmeric orbs, the archive traps, and then your sideboard is meant to fix specific problems. And I don't know what the specific problem is that this card is meant to fix.
Yeah, I may have been talked a little bit. Yeah, it is 20 mana value is less cards than you think it is. I just really want to warn people. Again, Murktide Regent has a large mana value. It's not going to hit the way you want it to. The card that I secretly have my eye on is Prosperous Innkeeper. It's just this is the 1 in a green 1/1. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, gain a life and also make a treasure. It's just a lot of material with effects for the mana cost. I don't know what I'm doing with it, but it's a lot.
Yeah, one thing that I had my eye on was Wish. A very to-the-point card is 2 in a red. You choose a card from outside the game. So in this case, your sideboard, you may cast that card this turn. And so in theory, this is in the same lineage as stuff like the original Wish cycle or Fae of Wishes. And this is, I guess, the most minimalist version of that card. The issue, though, is you can't use this as a setup tool because you have to cast that card this turn. So you can't wish for something with the intention of casting it on the following turn. And that also makes this much worse at answering hate permanents, for example. So if they have, let's say, a Damping Sphere, you can't wish for an Abrade and then next turn Abrade the Damping Sphere. You have to do that all in one turn, which already is a lot of mana. And if you're being taxed by a Damping Sphere or just locked out altogether by Deafening Silence, let's say, you're just not going to be able to do that. So I think this card is not actually going to really do anything. The one place it can maybe show up is if there's a combo deck that is not really gated on mana by the time it gets around to winning the game, but maybe wants to sideboard its win condition and have some of that additional flexibility. So, Twiddlestorm maybe comes to mind there, where instead of your big finish being Grape Shot, now it's you wish for your Grape Shot, but you could also wish for something else. Maybe that's the one use case, but I'm not high on this card. I think this one is a trap.
Yeah, if you're going to wish for a land to play that turn, that's the only thing I could think of. Let's see. Another minor player. Go ahead.
Minion of the Mighty. Let's talk about this one for a second. So this is the goblin for the 0/1 red 1-drop, where if you attack with creatures with total power 6 or more, you get to put a dragon from your hand into play, tapped and attacking. So the obvious combination with this is Scale Up, just to jump you to 6 right away. You can also just, I guess, play some creatures and attack with those as well, but where's the fun in that? And there are various other pump effects in Modern where you can get up to that 6 power threshold, I suppose. The thing is, I don't know what dragon we're meant to be putting in once we've jumped through all of these hoops successfully.
It's very specifically there's one from the not in Theros Beyond Deck, but from the Theros Beyond Death auxiliary products that gives everything double strike when it enters the battlefield and has double strike. It's Terror of Velos Peak or something like that. But realistically, if I'm casting a Scale Up on a 1-drop and it's not did you lose if you did that to Glistener Elf? Like, I don't really
Right.
know. Yeah.
Right. I think it has all of the problems of, Infect or, God forbid, did make us elemental or whatever, but none of the upside, really. So a cute gimmick deck. I will gladly devour the Saffron Olive video exploring this card, but not going to be a player in Modern, I think.
No. Feigned Death is a weird one drop that I think has a lot of potential. It's basically Undying Evil, but worse. It's the creature like comes back tapped instead of just coming back is the only difference. It's, target creature gains would die this turn, return it with a +1/+1 counter. I think that the Grief decks shifting towards like away from Ephemerate could be in the market for playing more than 4 Undying Evils.
Yeah, once you get to that point, I don't know exactly how many Undying Evils there are, but you have Undying Evil, Manakee Rebirth, which as a DFC, I think is the default one for the first 4 copies. And then there's like Supernatural Stamina, and I'm sure a few of them that I'm forgetting. Is this enough of an upgrade to pip all of those to the post, do you think?
Yeah, the +1/+1 counter on a Grief, a 4/3 Menace is a bigger deal. And especially if you're pairing it with Fury instead of Solitude, making a 4/4 double strike, that is nice.
Yeah, there's also a Power Word Kill. So this is the latest, Doomblade, Cast Down, Go for the Throat variant, which it kills everything except for some specific combination of creature types, which I'm sure is very flavorfully connected. And if there's nothing relevant that fits into those categories, then this may become the best option if your if your Dimir deck or whatever needs a 2-drop removal spell that covers a broad range of things. Where all of the others have some like one glaring weakness that they can't account for. The issue with this one is it says non-dragon, and so in a multi-regent world, I think that is just a complete non-starter.
Yeah, it's angels, dragons, devils, and demons, I believe. Which I was told is not actually anything flavorful because it's like not related to what Power Word Kill actually does, but like it's a set of creature types, and the fact that like one of the things that you would play a Doomblade over a 1-mana removal spell to kill is something you can't kill with it. It's just a non-starter right now.
While we're kind of on the topic, could we talk about the fact that with Zendikar Rising, we had the whole party mechanic and we had the whole some of the flavor from that set bound up in what seemed to be an obvious plant for the D&D set. And now that has come around, there seems to be literally no tie-in whatsoever between those two things.
No, I don't want to talk about it. I'd rather just not.
Moving swiftly on then. What else is there to get to for this set then?
Trelasara Moondancer. This is the white green legend 2/2. Whenever you gain life, put a counter on it and scry. There's enough Ajani's Bridemates that you could just make an all Ajani's Bridemates deck. I don't know. My issue is like you put this in white green and you're like, oh, this is just like a bad Heliod Spike Feeder. But like maybe you could build a Auriok Champion. This all sounds like a bad version of Spike Feeder Heliod, but there's enough redundancy that Ajani's Bridemate, the theme deck, could exist. And I had put Bard class as something that's kind of interesting. So Bard class, this is one of the classes where you are leveling them up. It is whenever, this is the one that's like legendary creatures themed. So it's legendary creature, it's red green to cast. Legendary creatures you control enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on them. Red green to level up, and it makes your legendary spells cost red green less. Only colored sources are reduced that way. But then 3 red green, whenever you cast a legendary spell, you get to light up this, or it's not quite light up the stage, it's play them this turn. So it's exile the top 2 cards of your deck and play them this turn. I think that there's room to build like a sort of normal, but like sort of combo deck with this card. There's just enough like cheap red green legends, right?
Yeah, and specifically, this is a legendary spell. So like Mox Amber triggers this, or you can kind of chain those together. And I assume this deck is already a somewhat decent Mox Amber deck to begin with. And so those Moxes tap for mana to keep casting more legends. We have like Ragavan we mentioned in the context of the legendary aggro deck last week. So I could kind of see that. My reservation would be that final jump up to level 3 costs 5 mana, and that's just so much, even accounting for, Mox Amber or Treasure from Ragavan and so on, that it just seems like a pipe dream most of the time.
I don't think you need to hit that 5 mana to get the full value out of this card, though. I think just like some counters and some like mana reduction along the way lets you really play a normal game where like once you hit 5 mana, it's over.
Yeah, I don't know if there are any good legends that care about having counters on them, like some equivalent of like a Walking Ballista style effect, especially in the colors that you would want to play this card in. But yeah, I could see looking into that.
Yeah, another legendary spell for this is Oath of Nisa. That's a pretty big one.
Sure.
Yeah, it's just a lot of like, it's all in the same package. That's the thing that gets me, is it's just like a lot of it's your Glimpse of Nature and your Heritage Druid in the same card.
Yeah. So I think that's going to do it for a set full of nonsense. Let's take a short break and then come back with some more exciting and invigorating nonsense.
What's up, everyone? Justin Parnell here.
Along with Ryan Overturf, and we want to tell you about the single best podcast on the SCG network.
Well, obviously, Ryan, you're talking about the 540.
Indeed I am, and that is the best podcast because we talk about the best format in the history of Magic.
Cube Draft?
Cube Draft.
Every week we go over all things Cube.
We're talking about in-depth reviews of brand new cards.
The best ways to draft and think about Arena and Magic Online Cube formats,
as well as ways to play with your friends,
and ways to play with your enemies.
Also some ways to make your friends into your enemies.
And cardboard takes of a variety of temperatures.
So if you're a fan of structured nonsense,
or if you hate it,
either way, all the same, check out the 540 every week wherever you find your podcasts, and right here on StarCityGames.com.
All right, so we're back here to round out this episode with, as always, our nonsense of the week. And you very kindly did the research for this one. What have you got for me? What's going to make my eyes jump out on stalks?
Okay, so I think that there's a little bit of a discussion to be had about the Eldrazi. We talked about this, the Glimpse of Tomorrow, Cascade, and all Eldrazi deck. Because this deck is surely nonsense. It's not the interesting kind of nonsense, though. And I just want to know why is this deck legal if Tybalt's Trickery isn't?
I don't have a good answer for that, but I do have a few plausible answers, I think. So the first one is, with Tybalt's Trickery, you are basically limited to doing exactly one thing and one thing only. And, sometimes you cascade into a Simian Spirit Guide, and that's a made for Twitch kind of moment. But for the most part, if you're playing a Trickery deck, you are signing up to just do that and nothing else. And so that limits the amount of variety in gameplay or deck building or so on. We've already seen quite a few different builds of these Eldrazi Glimpse decks. So when you wrote your article initially, you had a few different sketches. And then since then, we've had the kind of high-rolling Eldrazi, Arkham of Cruelty, Omniscience versions. We've had the small ball, Elementals versions with Risen Reef. We've had the non-Elementals list with Provisioner and Omnath and a bunch of landfall stuff going on. So there are a few different ways that you can build this. And then also, because Glimpse cares about the number of permanents that you have, there is a limit to how quickly you can go off with it. Whereas Tybalt's Trickery, you are just aiming for speed. So you had 4 Gemstone Cannons, and then you had Simian Spirit Guide, even though that potentially could muck up your Trickery, just because you had to go fast. That was the name of the game. And especially with Trickery being a major element in the format, you couldn't afford to wait because the mirror would just go faster than you. So you had to go all out and just go off as fast as possible. With this deck, not only do you not have to do that, you can't really do that, because if you are going all in on a Glimpse for 3, well, that's decently likely to just fail and not turn up anything useful. And so that gives you better gameplay in general, and then more time to respond to it with stuff like, Teferi Time Raveler or Chalice of the Void, which on turn 0 is a way to just ice that card from competing in the game. So I think there's better stuff going on here, and also more room for useful counterplay. So even if when it goes off, it can feel like nonsense sometimes, and especially if you're trying to navigate the Modo interface with the Omnath version or whatever. But for the most part, I think this can play a healthy part in the format, more so than Trickery ever could.
Okay. That is, I would say, a fair assessment, but I'm skeptical that people will want to continue playing against the Eldrazi deck. And it's like the other Glimpse of Tomorrow decks I think are much more interesting, but like very specifically the Eldrazi variant is not. And I think that people's taste for playing that deck is likely to wane before like people's desire to have it in the format wanes. But it's worth noting that that's like a really clean comparison for that list to Trickery.
Yeah, if you wander into any kind of MTG arena discussion forum, whether it's the official subreddit or whatever, it's almost like stepping into a parallel universe where the people who exclusively play Best of One are clamoring for Tybalt's Trickery to be banned because it's ruining their experience, and 1 in 3 matches is against this deck and it's hopeless. And then anyone who just plays Best of 3 has never played against that card in the past 10 months. And so I do think that there is a certain segment of the player base that gets like very incensed about that kind of thing, but then also a segment of the player base for whom this is all they want to be doing in Magic, is just casting Tybalt's Trickery over and over again. And so maybe this appeals to or offends those same segments of the player base.
Yeah, probably. I think we can skip ahead to the happy kind of nonsense of the week. I will mention along the way that there have been additional sightings of the white-red land destruction archetype, like just nonsense cleansing wildfire my own lands piles. Maybe we'll get to those a little more in depth later. And there's more of the Karth deck to be had. People are starting to experiment with other colors of planeswalkers, and I'll just tell them to skip right ahead to Ren and 6 and probably Chandra Torch of Defiance. But
I saw one of the Faithless Brewing podcast guys had went 4/5 colors with their Karth deck, so not just Ren and 6, but also Teferi, which, if that's a good card right now, then why not stretch the mana for that one? And Oath of Nissa doing a lot of work, stitching that mana base together with tape and glue. So I don't think you need to be quite that ambitious, but yeah, room to explore with Karth, definitely.
Yeah, Karth is a good card. You just need to play good cards with it. But the clear winner is M. Hayashi. This is the player responsible for a lot of the pushes on the mono red Obosh deck recently, including the inclusion of Hammer Borgarden, which I believe is a worse Firebolt, but I'm willing to believe is castable at least. But they had decided to go down the road of making every monocolor deck work in Modern in a new way. And they accomplished that with a 5-0 with mono black. This is, I think the only way to describe it is it's a Lurrus Kicker theme deck. It features 4 Torok Dreadcanter and 4 Gatekeeper of Malakir.
Yeah, and for once, M. Hayashi having the discipline not to put any kind of nonsense colorless lands in this deck, which when you're trying to cast triple black for Gatekeeper or Torak, maybe that decision gets made for you, but just a clean-ish mana base here. I guess 4 Castle Lockthane being the standout, but that one makes some amount of sense. I guess once you're doing that, maybe I guess unless you have exactly 2 castles, then Urborg never bails you out, because if the Urborg was a swamp, then you would just play that anyway, so forget that line of thought. But 4 castles, 8 fetch lands to go along with our Bloodghast, and then 8 swamps. So a very clean mana base here. And we were so close to the 20-20-20 split, but only 16 creatures in this one. 4 Bloodghast, 4 Voidwalker, and then the 8 kicker spells. And then rounding this out with, this is fun. We have 4 Inquisition, of course, and 4 Collective Brutality. No Thoughtseize. We decided that one is off the menu. And then 4 Fatal Push, 4 Dismember, and 4 Cling to Dust, making a fairly bold statement there.
Yeah, I like the dedication to Foros that continues on to the sideboard.
Yes.
It's the entire deck it's just all 4. Honestly, I'm shocked that there's not 4 swamps, 4 snow-covered swamps, but you can't win them all. The sideboard.
So the beautiful thing here is because Lurrus takes up a sideboard slot, every sideboard card count gets to be even still. So we have 4 Necromancer, 4 Rapture Bomb, 4 Lithoform Blight, and 2 Nile Spellbomb. And then the one Lurrus sneaking in there to make up the numbers. Yeah,
Lithoform Blight is you might recognize it as the Black Spreading Seas, basically. Notably a way to kill Urza Saga. Right? Loses all land types and abilities, and it's still a saga, so it dies on the spot.
Yes, this one sadly does not mana screw people in the same way as Spreading Seas because the land can still tap any color, but it's still useful if what you want to do is just shut down a Saga, shut down Urza's Tower, whatever the aim is there. My question here is, I've already seen the Merfolk deck that Emma Hayashi impressed us all with, dazzled us all with a while ago. What is the rest of the color pie going to look like? What lies in store for the mono green deck that will show up in the 5-0s a few weeks from now?
I remember seeing the mono white deck, and I was like not really inspired by it.
Oh,
I
wait,
don't
that
remember
one
seeing
already
the mono
dropped?
green deck. What?
The mono white one is already on our screens?
Yeah, I believe it's if you dig deep down, it involves Stoneforge Mystic and like creatures, which is really just kind of like, you know, some white cards in Modern these days.
Sure. I do love how on MTG Goldfish, if a deck list is not conventional enough, it just gets labeled as whatever its colors are. So there are a lot of like Ruberg decks or any Esper deck is like WUB or whatever. You look at M. Hayashi's page and it's all just like one letters. It's R for like, 9 out of 10 leagues. And then when they decide to experiment with some Galaxy Brain Merfolk deck, that's when the U comes in. And then, so a very clean and minimalist Goldfish page for M. Hayashi here.
Yeah, if you have a brand and you stick to it and have this level of success, I think that is a perfectly fine place to be these days.
So very keen to see what else M. Hayashi has in store for us in the future here. Anything else we want to get to before we let you all out of here?
No, I think that is about the peak nonsense of the week.
All right, so we'll be back next week with more nonsense, of course. We'll see how the format has adapted to the latest trends that we've identified in this episode. You can find my hopefully more detailed and written explanation of the impact of adventures in the Forgotten Realms in Modern on Star City Games this week. You can find me on Twitter if you want to complain about that at twitter.com/DarwinHavier. You can find Ari at twitter.com/ARMLX, I believe is correct there. And we will be back next week with more of the usual. Take care, everyone.